After the Erie Canal paid for itself, New York tried to build it 6 more times, and every copy failed. The Genesee Valley Canal, the Black River Canal, the Chenango Canal, branch routes through the state's interior valleys, each modeled on Erie's spectacular returns, each ending in bankruptcy or near abandonment. New York opened it in October 1825, and within 9 years its tolls had paid back more than the original construction cost. Roughly $7 million in 1817 bonds covered by $8.5 million in canal receipts by 1834. That single result, in that single corridor, became the founding myth of American infrastructure finance. Every state legislature in the Northeast read the Erie's ledger and reached the same conclusion. Build a canal, get rich. The lesson was wrong, or at least incomplete. New York would spend the next 40 years trying to repeat itself, in valleys the Mohawk Corridor had never demanded, against terrain that did not cooperate, and against a competing technology already on the horizon. This is the story of the sequel that bankrupted the state that wrote the original. The numbers behind the original success were genuinely staggering. Before the canal, hauling a ton of freight from Buffalo to New York City overland cost roughly $100 and took 20 days. After the canal opened, the same ton moved for $10 in 10 days, a 90% collapse in shipping cost, achieved in a single decade. Wheat shipments down the Erie went from 3,640 bushels in 1829 to over 500,000 by 1837 to more than 1 million by 1841. Every farm within a wagon ride of a feeder stream suddenly had a connection to Atlantic markets. Land values along the Mohawk doubled, then doubled again. The state's tolls funded the next phase of every public works debate in Albany. The Erie did not just work, it paid. What followed was not careful expansion, it was a wave. Between 1830 and the early 1840s, New York authorized lateral canals into nearly every drainage in the state. The Chenango south to Binghamton, the Genesee Valley toward the Allegheny, the Black River north into the Adirondack foothills, Crooked Lake at Penn Yan, the Oneida Lake feeder, the Oswego, the Chemung. Each was sold the same way. Each was estimated by an engineer working from Erie corridor assumptions. Each came in well over budget. The Chenango was estimated at roughly half what it cost. The Genesee Valley was estimated at $2 million and finished at $6 million. By the time the legislature stopped writing checks, the cumulative state commitment to branch canals ran into the tens of millions of dollars. The Erie's success had become a license to multiply it. The terrain told the truth before the ledgers did. The Erie's genius was its corridor, the Mohawk Gap, the only natural break in the Appalachian Wall north of Georgia. It crossed 363 miles with 83 locks and 692 feet of total rise and fall. The branches did not have that gift. The Black River Canal needed 109 locks and 35 miles to negotiate a 1,079-foot climb out of the Mohawk Valley into the Adirondack foothills. More locks in a tenth the distance, lifting more vertical feet than the entire Erie. Every lock meant a lock tender, a stone chamber to maintain, a winter freeze to thaw out, and a delay for every boat. The branches were not small Eries. They were canals fighting the landscape on every mile, and the landscape was charging interest. Towns did not believe the terrain. Penn Yan, Binghamton, Boonville, Mount Morris, Whitehall, every village within 10 miles of a planned cut platformed itself as the next Rochester. Land speculators bought lots along the projected towpath at multiples of farmland prices. Hotels were built before the locks were dug. Newspapers ran prospectuses. Ground was broken in October ceremonies that copied, almost verbatim, the language of the Erie's 1817 groundbreaking at Rome. Then the cost overruns hit. Then the 1837 panic. Then the 1841 New York fiscal crisis, which forced a temporary halt to the Genesee Valley and Black River projects. Some lines reopened. Some stayed dormant for years. The Genesee Valley would not reach the Allegheny until 1862, 22 years after its first segment opened, against a steam-powered alternative the engineers of 1836 had not imagined. The alternative arrived quietly, on iron rails. In 1840, the United States had roughly 2,800 miles of railroad. By 1850, it had over 9,000, more than the rest of the world combined. By 1860, the figure was 30,000 miles, a tenfold expansion in a single generation. Where canals required a watershed, rails required only graded earth. Where canals froze 4 months a year, rails ran in February. The wood-burning American-type locomotives of the 1850s, with their flared bonnet stacks, did in hours what a packet boat did in days. The Genesee Valley Canal had not yet been completed when railroads were already running parallel to it on the same valley floor. The infrastructure New York was still building was being made obsolete by the infrastructure beside it. The branches never adjusted. They could not. The accounting caught up in the 1870s. The Chenango Canal, in its 40 operating years, never once collected enough in tolls to pay its own annual repair bill. The Genesee Valley was running on emergency state borrowings, $500,000 in 1840, another $550,000 in 1841, and continuous patching after that. The Black River was a maintenance sink. By the mid-1870s, the legislature in Albany was using profits from the main Erie trunk to keep the laterals open. On June 4, 1877, the legislature formally abandoned the Genesee Valley and the Crooked Lake Canal. The Chenango followed in 1878. The towpaths were sold off, in many cases to railroads that bought the corridor and laid track on the same straight grade. The original Erie kept running. The branches were finished. On November 3, 1903, the people of New York voted on what to do with the rest of the system. The referendum authorized $101 million in state borrowing to enlarge the main Erie trunk into a true barge canal, and to formally retire all but 5 canals from the original network. It passed with nearly 75% of the 1.1 million votes cast. Construction broke ground in 1905. The Barge Canal opened on May 15, 1918, replacing the Erie's 1825 alignment with deeper, wider channels engineered for steam-powered freight. By then, the Erie's freight share was already a fraction of what it had been in 1860. The 1918 canal was a working waterway for perhaps 30 years. After that, increasingly, it was a recreational corridor. The thing that had built the state was now a place to take a boat ride. What the towns inherited was a slower kind of ending. Penn Yan kept its Main Street and its grain trade, and reorganized around the railroad that bought the canal corridor. Binghamton industrialized on shoes and cigars and outlived its waterway. Whitehall, the southern terminus of the Champlain feeder, slowly emptied. Mount Morris, Portageville, Boonville, the further into the laterals you went, the deeper the depressions. Stone locks now stand in second-growth woods, weeds in the chambers, towpath ruts grown over but still visible from the air. The AGEF photographers documented many of them in the 1930s before demolition or collapse. They look exactly like what they are, the receipts of a public works decision made on a successful precedent that did not transfer. The state spent 40 years learning that lesson. Then it spent another 40 trying to forget it. New York was not alone. Pennsylvania spent roughly $25 million on the main line of public works between 1826 and 1834, never earned the money back, ran its transportation debt past $40 million by 1841, and defaulted for 2.5 years. Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois each repeated the same arithmetic at smaller scale. The template trap is the dynamic. A single piece of infrastructure works under a specific set of conditions. The conditions are read as universal. The state copies the form into terrain, markets, and timelines that do not support it. The losses are paid in public debt and in towns that do not industrialize on schedule. The pattern returns. Railroads in the 1870s, streetcars in the 1900s, urban renewal highways in the 1960s. Penn Station was demolished under the same logic that dug the Black River Canal. A previous era's answer applied to a question it no longer fit. If you have not seen our Penn Station episode, it sits beside this one on the channel. Same diagnosis, different decade, same country.